I'd like to talk about some experiences and approaches to planning agile and iterative projects. Got quite a few topics here on the agenda, if you'll see from the invitation. I'd like to start by talking about the role of management in agile projects, because when you read a lot of the literature around agile, then it always seems to downplay the importance of management, even sometimes going as far as saying that management isn't needed in this brave new agile world. And I'd like to take a look at some of the myths inherent in there and see how true they are. Then moving on, we'll look at time boxing and iteration planning, the basic thing that gets our wheels turning for our iterative projects. Measurement and control, moving up to some release planning and looking at how we can use decision points and integrate iterative and agile approaches into our governance and financial frameworks that we have in most organizations. And finally finish off with a few practical hints and tips on how you could get started to become more agile and iterative if you haven't started yet. Okay, so what you will notice when you look at the literature on agile and on iterative approaches, there's a lot of myths around agile methods in particular, and iterating at all. There are people who claim that when you're doing an agile iterative approach, there's no need for any plans. There's a lot of managers and senior managers and CXOs who worry that there'll be a loss of control, that it'll be anarchy. Other myths include that there's no unhappiness, and most importantly for a seminar on planning and managing agile initiative projects, what is the role of management in these areas? I'd like to take the approach of the Mythbusters, that you've probably seen on the Discovery Channel. That's the one they have in Europe. And take a look at these myths, what's caused them, and if there's any truth to them, just so we can understand the role that management plays. So the first myth is with Agile there's no plans. There's this myth that Agile teams don't have any plans. They just move from one iteration to the next, and as long as they produce some working software, everything will be okay. And it's analogous to the illustration here from Alice in Wonderland, where Alice meets the Cheshire Cat. He's sitting up in his tree and asks the Cheshire Cat, which way should I go from here? And the cat says, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. And Alice says, I don't much care as long as I get somewhere. And the cat says, well, it doesn't matter which way you go, but you're sure to get somewhere if only you walk long enough. And this is how iterative gets presented sometimes. As long as we can produce some working software, as long as we get some velocity going on our project team, then we're guaranteed that we'll get someone. As long as we iterate long enough, we'll get where we need to be. Now, if we look at the reality behind that, we'll see that actually agile teams have quite a lot of plans and do a lot of planning. One of the things that gets lost in a lot of the hype is the need for release planning. Agile teams do release planning. They have to look at their release dates, at the release windows, and what kind of things are going to be in each of those releases. And it is not just setting the frequency of the releases, but like I say, looking at their purpose objectives, setting up a series of releases so that the work can be integrated into the business. And we'll look at some techniques for release planning a bit later. Agile teams also do a lot of iteration planning. There's various agile and iterative approaches, ranging from things like the unified process, or the one that's particularly popular at the moment is Scrum. But in all of these approaches to planning agile and iterative projects, then there's always the release planning, and there's always iteration planning. And iteration planning is a large part of any kind of agile project. If you are using Scrum and planning a sprint, then the sprint might be 2 weeks, 10 days in length. And the whole team will spend half the first day in a planning session to plan and identify all the tasks that will be done in the 2 weeks. And the whole team will spend time in the assessment, half a day typically, at the end of the 10 days. So that's 10% of the time looking at planning and assessment. That's not counting the daily stand-ups, the release planning and all the other things. What we get in Agile and Iterative is lightweight plans. The broader the planning horizon, the less precise and the less detailed the plans are, but they're still there, and there's a lot of, one of the key tenets of all the Agile approaches is about commitment, as well as a commitment for the iteration, but commitment to releases and longer periods as well. So that myth is busted. There's a good Agile projects will have plans, they'll have the iteration plans, they'll have a release plan. And we'll talk about scaling up to larger projects as well. What about the idea that with Agile there's no control? One of the fears in a lot of managers and a lot of management organizations is that Agile teams will quickly become out of control, doing whatever they like, when they like, just like that little kitten there in the picture. They'll gorge on their empowerment and freedom and stop delivering. Now this fear is often caused by some of these other myths, like, well, there's no plans, we don't know where we're going, how are we going to know what we're doing? The reality of Agile is that Agile and Iterative approaches are very disciplined. It's an incredibly focused and disciplined way of work. Every day, all the team members look at the list of tasks and select the most important tasks that are going to help the team meet its objectives and its commitments. Work is done in priority order, the priority set by the customer. And the key thing with all Agile and Iterative approaches is developing working software. And that software needs to be tested, which forces work to be completed. And what we're going to look at, again later in this presentation, is measurements. What you get in a good Agile Iterative project is a lot of measurements of progress, of risk, of capacity, velocity. And these allow you to make decisions as a manager and actually provide you with more control. One of the largest Agile rollouts in the UK was at British Telecom, and I was talking to one of their quite senior managers there, and the end result of Agile adoption, which was very successful, was that he actually ended up with more work. The nature of his work changed. It went around to being about decision making and facilitation, but he was actually busier than he'd been in the previous waterfall, less Agile, less Iterative world. So what we find is that there is more control. So that one's busted as well. What about the idea that there's no unhappiness? That all the developers will like this way of working. They'll all like the empowerment. All the customers will like it because they're getting working software every 4 weeks, and everyone will be very, very, very happy. What you'll find is that the Agile approach is not necessarily for everybody. Even some of the developers won't hate it because it's very disciplined, because it's about commitment and it's about finishing and testing things. Some people who like to hide behind their job descriptions or specialise in just one thing will find it difficult transition for them. And all Agile projects need a lot of customer involvement. Some of those people will find it very difficult. The main cause of a lot of unhappiness, and we do occasionally see failures and backlash against Agile, and a few people are having problems with Scrum at the moment, but that's generally caused because people are bought into other myths, like no plans, no control, no requirements, no documentation, etc. If you do set up things properly, then it does become a much better way for everyone to work and for everyone to get involved. And a lot of that is down to management. So the final one of these little myths I'd like to take a quick look at is that if you go Agile, you don't need any managers. It is certainly something I've heard people say quite